Very much.
So, welcome everybody. I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this event and for inviting me to this panel debate. So, the participants of this panel debate, so we will talk in English, and therefore I would like to ask all those who don't understand English to use your headphones or to select the interpreting feature in Zoom. So now I will switch to English.
We have a great lineup of panelists here, allowing us to cover various aspects of this important topic. And luckily we can sit here together in this room, but safely apart. But I guess that the hybrid meeting will also run smoothly. But already at the beginning, I would like to suggest all those that are following us online, if you have any questions, please put them down in the comments, and we will make sure that they will reach this panel. And at a certain point, we will react to those comments and questions if there are any. Okay, so recent years, we have seen some really worrying developments, ranging from the rise of populist leaders and declining support to democratic institutions, also the rule of law, and there's also growing distrust in all kinds of institutions, including the established media. And quite significant polarization of public opinion and a flood of disinformation. These trends are often connected with what's happening in social media and digital platforms, but to be frank, also the media themselves are often a central part of these processes, and contribute to them either by amplifying those that's happening online or serving as propaganda devices or tools on their own. So this panel, with its varied composition, provides us a good opportunity to shed some light on how these processes, trends are being manifested both on the national level and on the European level. And unfortunately, Central Europe is at the forefront of this illiberal turn, but similar trends have been documented also in other countries, not only in Europe, but worldwide. And therefore, we would like to reflect on these developments, but primarily within the European context. I'm Tanja KERŠEVAN SMOKVINA, a researcher and assistant professor at the University of Ljubljana. I'm specialized in media policies and regulation, but now I will hand over to my colleague, Ágnes URBÁN, media economist. She prepared a short presentation. We will use it for setting the scene as a kind of introduction into our debate. And Ágnes is coming from a university as well, Corvinus University, and she's head of info communication department at this university and associate professor, and she's also active in a media watchdog organization, Mertek Media Monitor, right? Okay, Ágnes, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I promise that I will be very short, so I just try to show you the problem areas in the Hungarian media. And I think most of you will be rather familiar with these issues, since I think they are rather problematic also here in Slovenia. So you can see the main problem areas here, and I will have a few slides about these problems. The first is the market intervention. It is extremely interesting how the ownership structure was changed in the last decade, in the last long decade in Hungary. Viktor Orbán came into power in 2010. So basically we talk about 11 or almost 12 years. There were ownership changes, and of course I don't want to go into details. There are detailed researches about the changes of the ownership structure. The essence of the story is that the most professional foreign investors left the Hungarian market, and the domestic ownership became more and more significant. Typically, big oligarchs came to the scene as media owners. It is interesting that these oligarchs were practically financed by the EU, since they were and since they are well-known investors in the Hungarian market, in the construction business. I can say they win a public procurement tender every day. So they have the financial background for building a media empire based on the EU funds. And there is a special Hungarian organization, the Central European Press and Media Foundation, shortly the so-called KESMA. It is a very special organization, I can say, and it is the good side of the story that the Hungarian ownership structure in the media became more transparent, because it is absolutely evidently a pro-government foundation. There is no question at all. But the problem with this KESMA is that the ownership structure became extremely concentrated. I can say that it is the most concentrated media market in the EU right now. And I have two figures about, it doesn't work right now. Yeah, thanks. So I have two figures about the state advertising spendings, just illustrations, and this pie chart shows where the state money went in the last year in the forms of state advertising. The biggest part of the money went to the pro-government but not KESMA companies, especially the TV2 commercial television service. It gets billions of forints every year, and the KESMA also got 37%. It is interesting to see that only 14% of the state advertising money went to the media companies that can be called more or less independent. Oops. And it is another illustration about the print media sector. You can see the daily newspapers, the regional newspapers, and the magazines. We can say that today the daily newspaper and the regional newspaper sectors are not markets anymore. I mean, these publishers and these media brands are not sustainable on business grounds anymore. They are practically financed by state money. The magazine sector is more or less healthy, so probably they are sustainable based on market revenues. The next issue is public service media, which is a huge problem area, and I don't want to go into details. There are serious problems with the editorial practices. It became a propaganda machine. as I know, it is a rather well-known solution here in Slovenia that the news agency became part of the public service media system. And it spreads, at least in Hungary, it spreads the propaganda in the whole media market. And there are serious problems with the financing and with the organization structure. It is not transparent at all. I can talk about it more detailed later on, but I don't want to go into details right now. The Media Council is something very special in Hungary. There are 5 members in the Media Council, in the so-called Media Council. It is the media authority in Hungary. All of them were delegated by the ruling party. And fortunately, it has somehow limited impact on the whole media market. But for example, Media Council was able to restructure the radio market. And they also have a right to block or to allow the media mergers and acquisitions. And it was a tool that they continuously used in the last decade. They allowed the pro-Fidesz mergers, and they blocked the mergers of independent market players. So it is also a very dangerous tool. And a few words about the journalism. I'm afraid that you are also well-known. So these problems are also well-known for you here in Slovenia. Because it is more and more difficult for the journalists to get information, to have an access to government politicians. At least it is a typical problem in Hungary. And even the data requests based on Freedom of Information Act is rather problematic. A few years ago it was quite simple to get data, but today it is almost impossible. And as you know, there is a regional expansion. So Orbán realized that it is a good strategy to increase his political influence in the region if he buys up different media companies. And especially in Slovenia and in North Macedonia, he bought up several companies. I think there are both business and political motivations behind this step, but probably you know much more about the situation here than me. And it will be a good topic for the discussion, so I don't want to go into details about the role of the European Union. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Ágnes. I invite the panelists back. Thank you for this first-hand experience, and I forgot to mention before that the main aim of today's discussion is also to look for some kind of way forward and to map some solutions to these problems that we are identifying right now. But what you said by the end of your presentation, I think it's a good starting point for Primož. Primož CIRMAN is one of our most prolific journalist and editor at the investigative portal Necenzurirano. He's also a multiple award winner and currently serving as a vice chair of the Slovenian Association of Journalists, which is the largest professional organization of journalists in Slovenia. So I would invite you now, Primož, to continue where Ágnes stopped and to provide us your perspective of a media practitioner working in Slovenia and facing all these challenges. Just before I leave the floor to you, I would like also to mention that you, because of the work you do, are also a common target of several political pressures and threats, and also so-called slaps, which are quite a worrying phenomena in the European Union as well. These are the so-called strategic lawsuits against public participation, and also the European Parliament, we have a representative here, is now dealing with them, and they just recently proposed some initiative, and we will hear later on that. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me. I would like to continue where Ágnes stopped. We always like to joke, but it's not a joke anymore in journalists in Slovenia, that if we want to see our future, we have to look into Hungary, because not only the practices are the same, now the people are the same. The names that were mentioned on that panel are the names that are currently present in ownership structure of Slovenia media too. You had the name Lawrence Mesaros, his pronunciation is not the best in Hungarian. He is, they say that he's one of the best friends of Mr. Orbán, and he is the key financer of the Nova television, the Slovenian Democratic Party propaganda machine in Slovenia. His two companies, we just ran a story about it today, that 12 million euros have been injected from Hungary to this propaganda machine in the last 4 years. Imagine how much money that is, not only for media, how much money that is for a political party. You have political parties in Slovenia that spend maybe 200,000, 300,000 euros per election campaign. So while you have Mr. Janša here, he's talking about stealing an election, while the same, you have an influx of foreign money to media and propaganda system basically run by people from or very close to SDS party, and basically no one says a thing, no one even bothers. So it just continues to do so. You mentioned TV2. TV2 is owned by Mr. Jožef Vida. He's a Hungarian oligarch. He's now the owner of Planet TV in Slovenia. You saw the practices. You saw the smearing of, maybe if you can show it again, the site on your panel, one specific site. About Mr. Orbán calling fake news media. Okay, you have influx of state advertising money into media that are not mainstream media. You have the same rhetorics. Okay, you see here, challenges for journalism, and that's from the Hungarian colleague. Number one, difficult economic situation, financial difficulties in independent media, vulnerability to media companies, pressure on journalists. Basically, there is no media now in Slovenia, mainstream media, as they call it in Trumpist rhetoric, that is not in the same economic situation. Printing media have a lot of challenges ahead because of technology structures, changes and structural changes. Everyone is in financial difficulties. Everyone is basically dependent on several companies that pay ads, and basically there is non-Slovenian media who solve the question: how can we sell our content online if we do not develop it in print anymore? Because logically, no one found an answer to that question, because no one in Europe haven't found that answer. Number two, verbal attacks. Viktor Orbán, you're probably aware, if you have an account on Twitter, you know basically everything about verbal attacks on Slovenian media. Fake News Factory was the biggest independent news portal in Hungary. So the fake news machine was Slovenian press agency a few months ago, and the POP TV, the largest commercial party in Slovenia, was basically called by Mr. Janša as largest opposition party. Number three is also important. Government politicians do not give interviews to independent media because journalists are often not invited for important events. That is happening. When was the last time you saw an interview by a government minister, especially from the ruling party, in, let's call it, mainstream media, on television or anywhere else. Another practice is that ministers are only, they only go into the TV shows or news studios if they're only there by themselves. There's no way that, for instance, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was practice. You had one guy from the government and one guy from the opposition, or maybe multiple guys from the opposition, so they can challenge their views. It's not happening anymore because ministers set this as a condition. We only enter this studio alone. Number 4, data requests based on Freedom of Information Act are often not answered, or state institutions charge incredibly high fees. That's also happening in Slovenia. What is happening now to our work is that the deadlines are prolonged. So basically, if you, for instance, last example, Ministry of Environment, you want to know, you want to find out which are the consultancy agencies or consultants that provided that wrote new law for, I don't know, waters or protection of environment. You get 1 week to respond, and when they tell you that some of the documents you cannot get, you have to go to the Freedom of Information Act process, which lasts 20 working days. So basically, in reality, if you're rejected, you can complain. You need around 3 to 6 months to get documents that were once available in 2 days. And of course, as a consequence of everything, credibility of journalism is decreasing. Why? Because the politics is trying to smear not only journalists that write stories that are not welcomed anymore, but the credibility of journalism and media as itself. In Slovenia, okay, we win this one, because in Slovenia, not only that journalists are fake news providers, media are fake news factors, in Slovenia journalists are also spreaders of the disease. That's an important part. The national television, the biggest commercial television, Pop TV, the Slovenian press agencies, they were all charged with this etiquette that provides everyone, from opposition politicians to intellectuals to any critics of the government, that the protesters, that they spread disease. So basically, maybe this is now something, thank you, this is something we should maybe talk a lot more about before going to active pressures, because all these lawsuits, all these smearing campaigns, all these pressures on owners, which is severe in this period, all this, we now have everything in a scale that was never seen before. There were, of course, political pressure under every government, under your government also. That's part of the job. But the type of the pressure, and especially the aim of the pressure, which is not maybe to maybe balance media reporting or maybe kill a story or two, but the aim now is so clear, and aim is basically to destroy the media landscape in Slovenia once it was, and to substitute it with the propaganda machine that is basically directly funded from Hungary.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now move to Thijs. Guillaume, I hope you don't mind if I give the floor first to him, because I think he has an immediate response to what's happening in Slovenia, perhaps, or most probably because you took the part at the plenary, the recent plenary in the European Parliament on Slovenia. And also, as an MEP, you also took the part in the recent initiative when the EP called for European regulation against slaps. So let me introduce you. Thijs REUTEN, an MEP, among others, serving in the past as a political advisor to the then Dutch Minister for European Affairs, Frans Timmermans, and until recently he was the head of policy for Amsterdam-based NGO Global Reporting Initiative. So what were your main takeaways on the situation in Slovenia based on the discussion in the plenary in the European Parliament.
Yeah, thank you, Tanja. Thank you for having me also here on this forum. And I can say this event, but also this segment on media freedom couldn't have been more timely. And if I listen to the stories also of Primož and of Ágnes, I think I'm even more convinced that I addressed the right topic at this debate last month, because this debate was primarily constructed around the question of the European prosecutors issue. But I focused on the media freedom. Not because I think that at this moment we can put Slovenia at the same scale as the same position as Hungary and Poland. But I started my intervention by saying that I do not want to have a debate in the European Parliament in 5 years from now about Slovenia, like we had 2 months ago with the Prime Minister of Poland, talking for 35 minutes in the European Parliament, basically offending his own people really in that debate. So I said, this is really a lesson that we should have learned by now, a lesson to see the early warning signals, the early warning signals of this concentration of power in the ownership of media, the early warning signals of politicians discrediting other politicians, using fake arguments, using tactics that we only know from eras we do not want to go back to. So I think that is all the more reason to be very critical, to be very vigilant on this. I think that, we will be touching, I think, in the second part of this discussion on the concrete measures, on the SLAPS legislation. But in the past months, I'm serving as a European Parliament member now for half a year. And I've come across so many stories in so many different countries that I'm not convinced that this problem that we have seen in Poland, that we have seen in Hungary, that we have seen, and I really like Primož's expression of the spreading of the disease. Because that is what it is. I call it the virus of autocratization. And that is not because all these countries then suddenly will become autocracies in the full scale of the sense. But you see these processes happening, and usually it starts with some kind of interference in the media. Usually it starts with some kind of discrediting media, journalists, or different interest groups in society related to activists or NGOs. So I think that we have to be very vigilant on that. And to close on this first part, Tanja, I would like to say that on the recent visit of my colleagues, committee from the European Parliament to Slovenia, they did in effect say that the institutions still worked well. But there were grave concerns, and especially about the fact that, for instance, the government didn't want to receive the committee. That is discrediting also the members of the European Parliament, but also the way the Prime Minister, instead of receiving this delegation, or at least the chair of the delegation, decided to go on Twitter and discredit the members of the European Parliament using arguments also linked to one of my country, Ms. Sophie In 't Veld, my colleague also from the Netherlands, using also a fake argument about this journalist who tragically got killed in the Netherlands. But that was totally a different issue. However, I'm not convinced that these problems that we are facing now in Slovenia, and as Primož said, a disease that is spreading also to the Western Balkan countries, because it serves as an inspiration. Because autocrats, populistic autocrats all over Europe, also just outside Europe, get inspired by what's happening in European Union countries. And what's even worse is that I think that our credibility as a European Union is at stake, especially around this topic. Because if we cannot do this well inside the European Union, how are we ever going to stand up against autocrats outside the European Union? It hampers our credibility, and apart from crises that will probably come in the next few years, I think the single biggest challenge that we are facing as a European Union is maintaining the rule of law and preserving our values. This is for a start, Tanja.
Thank you very much. I'm sure Guillaume has some views on that. Guillaume KLOSSA, was tasked for preparing an important document, strategy, industrial strategy actually for media sovereignty, and this was done at the initiative of the former European Commissioner for Digital Single Market, Andrus Ansip. And this document is, if I understood correctly, paved the way for several current actions at the European level. You are now chairman of CIVICO Europa, pro-democracy European civic movement, and I would like you to continue where Thijs ended, and maybe also share with us in the continuation the philosophy behind these actions you participated at, and how you see the outcomes of this strategy.
Thank you for this work. Maybe just to give a wider picture of what's happening. It's not something new. What is at risk is the philosophy itself of the European project. A bit louder. Does it work or not? Yeah, okay. Thanks. Okay, so I just want to give a bigger picture of what's happening. And what's happening is that the philosophy of the European project, the post-war European project, is in danger. We need to understand that the European project relies upon two pillars. One is informed democracy, and the other one is social market economy. And for these two pillars to work, you need a pluralistic information. You need a pluralistic information. And in fact, we have developed in Europe over the past 70 years, and I was director of the EBU for 6 years, a specific model based upon sustainable media and a kind of partnership between public service media, more and more independent, and private media. And this system is undermined now because several things. On the one side, there is a question of democratic culture and media literacy, but media literacy goes within democratic culture. You can make media literacy, but without a strong democratic culture, is not useful. So this is one thing. The second thing is the digital wave for the last 20 years, which has weakened the media business model. And by doing that, the value of media has decreased. The economic value of media has decreased. Such a way that, in fact, it's very easy to buy a media. And many media owners are ready to sell or to give their media because it's expensive. So as long as we do not answer the question of the media business model, we will have the same phenomenon everywhere. And in addition to that, we have the GAFA. And the GAFA are somehow the cherry on the cake, because in fact, they are speeding up the dismantlement of the media ecosystem. And they are also changing the citizen behavior and increasing the cost for media. So these three phenomena are combining to undermine our media ecosystem, which means to undermine the two pillars of the European society, the social market economy and the informed democracy. That's the topic. And I think it's very important to see, to have a big picture and to share a big picture. Because where we are now is the result of this process. And it is this process which needs to be addressed. And we became aware of it relatively late, and in fact, the past 5 years, because we were very naive with regard to the GAFA, and we understood that they were promoting and contributing to promote fake news on the one side, but also changing the behavior of people with regard to information. We were sensitive because there were attacks from Russia, from China, etc. And we understood that all our democracy, and not only in the East, but also in the West, starting by the US, were attacked. So now, what should we do? I think it's a complex issue, and there is not easy answer to a complex issue. But we need a systemic approach. A systemic approach, leveraging all the elements that the EU has under its competency. And this, it starts from industrial policy. It includes education, research, R&D research, innovation, what we can do in terms of rule of law, etc. But it's not only one thing, it's everything. And we also need to gather at European level the media stakeholder, because the media landscape is very, very divided, very, very fragmented. And they can't be a partner of the European institution. They are not organized. The media associations are not organized at European level. So there is a real question, which is to develop a coalition in order to push a systemic policy. The European Commission has started to propose a certain number of things which are based upon my report. In terms of regulation, there is the DMA, the DSA, okay, that's a good thing. They started to develop a news media forum, but there is not a general vision. And I think the real topic is to develop a general vision as quick as possible. Otherwise, we will be always in delay, and we will not able to catch up the event. And the events are going very, very quickly. And what we can do in terms of regulation, it takes 2 to 3 years. The same time to be implemented, it's too late. It's really an emergency issue, and we should find an emergency track. Really, an emergency track. So we need to find a way to put this question much higher into the political agenda. Really. And this requires a collective reflection of leadership at the highest level, but also the capacity to mobilize citizens and to mobilize journalists, media organizations at European level. It's not easy, but it's a matter of emergency.
Thank you. Is it working? Okay, thank you. Thank you. I see your point, and now I'm looking into your direction because you are the only media professional at this panel. Have you had any immediate reaction to what Guillaume said on this fragmentation of media professionals at the European level? And where is some room for improvement of that situation? How could you contribute to this vision, this broader vision?
We certainly cannot analyze what happens to media in Central and Eastern Europe now without the context. And the context is the rise of populism and extreme right. Basically, I would say that what happens in media is only the consequence of the other process. And the biggest problem I see is, what is the lesson for politicians in Poland, Hungary, Slovenia, and Croatia, and of course in countries that are not in EU and probably will never be, although they still dream that they will be in Bosnia, Montenegro, Macedonia. The lesson is, populism pays off, brutality pays off, destroying media pays off. Why? Because there's no punishment. I always talk about simple example. If you're a country or a state, you have a budget difficulties, you're in problems. If you have extreme budget difficulties, you spend too much, they send you troika. But if you run campaigns against media, if you violate your own media laws, you want to destroy your national press agency, you want to you introduce laws that are against the rule of law, against European law. Basically, what is the sanction? there isn't any. So I think that, of course, it's an issue that should be addressed on systemic level. I think that press and media freedom is or should be one of the main pillars of EU. I mean, that was what this was all about, right? To have some sort of supervision over power. And of course, as I said, the violation is rewarded. So I think that, first of all, the EU should have a some kind of permanent body that would follow deviations in this area in European countries. I don't know, is that like a troika or some sort of commission or the same way as a European DA or the same system? But you see now where the trend is, the line that is now repeated more often in Slovenia, that national law is about the European law. So this is the key fight, not only it's not only a question about Poland and Hungary. It's the key fight in which the EU will prevail or fail. Because if we let the national law regarding such an important pillar of the Union itself is about the European rule of law, then we should all live and shut the light out. So I think that first step is some kind of permanent body and system of sanctions, because, as I said, I think that you saw what happened in Hungary. You see what's happening in Poland. You have guys like Adam Michnik talking 10 years about the process that is happening in Poland. You saw in Czech Republic had a prime minister which was a media mogul. So one more example. We had a SLAP conference, I think 2 weeks ago, with journalists having same problems. That means that serious lawsuits are filed against us. For instance, like in our case, where 39 lawsuits is filed against our media by the same guy, Mr. Roksnicic, who's a friend and so-called self-called advisor of Prime Minister. And basically, 10, 15 years ago, SLAP cases were common in Russia, in Turkey, Serbia, Albania. But now we see these cases of SLAP suits in Poland, Cyprus, Sweden, Slovenia, Italy. So basically now it's the problem, the practice that was once common in the countries that EU wanted to change. Now is the opposite is happening. Basically, these countries change the EU from within with these practices.
And the EU is responding with a huge delay, I guess.
Well,
but
it's not responding at all, I'm afraid. Respect to everyone from civil society to international press organizations to some commissioners that maybe are doing their best they can, but on systemic level, we got none. And you see, and then it happens, the tragic event with Mr. Kuciak, with Ms. Daphne Caruana. But this is all the end of the process that starts right here.
Indeed, but still, we at least have some promises, and let's discuss these promises for a while. We have some promises or some announcements recently coming from Commissioner Breton announcing the European Media Freedom Act. Yeah, we don't know what the content of this act will be, but there are signs they want to ensure more safeguards for pluralism and for media freedom, safety of journalists, and so on and so forth. What is your view, Ágnes? Do you see, first, as a Hungarian, do you see it as a realistic project? Or will it be watered down at the end of the process and then maybe adopted something on a declaratory level? Do you see there is any potential of this kind of acts for overturning these processes happening in Slovenia, Hungary, and elsewhere?
It's a difficult question, and actually I don't know the European politics so deeply that I can evaluate the future of this initiative. Basically, it is more than nothing, and it is a good sign that something happened and commissioners talked about it. So I think it is a serious plan, I hope. And then the topics are absolutely relevant. So they talk about ownership, concentration, state advertising, and so on. But I have to tell you, I'm a little bit skeptical about the European Commission. 5 years ago, we submitted a complaint based on the state aid rules. We sent it the DG competition, and in the last 5 years, nothing happened. They didn't refuse this complaint. They didn't react. We just got the information that they have negotiations with the Hungarian government, and they sent questions to the Hungarian government, and they got answers, and they analyzed the situation, and so on and so on. It started in 2016. Now it is the end of 2021. We submitted another complaint 3 years ago. It is about the market distortion effects of the state advertising, because it is really heavily analyzed, and it is absolutely clear that it distorts the market. The result is quite the same. They didn't refuse the complaint. They didn't react it. They just analyze the problem. And the competition law is an extremely powerful tool in the hand of the European Commission. So it is really possible to use for this kind of purposes, and they do not use it at all. I have no idea why. I'm pretty sure that there are political reasons behind. They don't want to start this political conflict or something like that. So if they do not use their most powerful tool to stop this practice, I'm not really sure that this new initiative will be really useful, but we will see.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Very quick reaction. There is an evolution about the philosophy of the competition law, and there was a communication 2 weeks ago. And in this communication, it was said that in the future M&A, merger and acquisition, should integrate the European objective. In this respect, I understand that they have in mind digital transformation and sustainable development. But, I mean, rule of law, democracy could be integrated within this vision, and not only the major economic objectives, which are digital transformation and how to face the climate change economically.
And what is your opinion on that, Thijs?
Yeah, no, I fully agree that none of these solutions or none of these actions will help if we use them just one by one. As the past 5 or 10 years shown, that sometimes reacting or sometimes sending a letter to a capital does not help. You have to be very consistent, very persistent, and use all your instruments at your disposal. That is exactly what we have been trying to advocate with a broad majority in the European Parliament towards the Commission. Use the instruments at your disposal. We even created an entirely new one, the conditionality mechanism, but we still have to fight for putting it into use. And that is where also the position of the European Council comes in and the member states. because we have gone through a few years where member states have consistently trying to protect each other or watering down conclusions, watering down initiatives. But coming back to a little bit more optimistic maybe, because the good news is that we are seeing the patterns now. We are seeing the relation also between the power of the social media platforms, the power of the algorithms behind it that actually stimulate fake news instead of curbing it. So we have to bring that also into the equation and also see and really be very, well, how do you say that? Be very not naive about it, that the financial model behind quality journalism has been destroyed. It has been destroyed, and you can perfectly see that also in some other member states that we are not discussing elaborately today. But for example, in the Netherlands, also local news that is also meant to scrutinize local politicians. That is where it starts. That is where democracy starts, in our cities and in our communities. The business model behind that, it's gone because of also the platform. So you have to bring the curbing of the influence of the social media platform, which is partly done through the DSA and the DMA initiatives, into connection with what Guillaume has been saying, the democratic culture, fostering media literacy again, and also, well, educating people about what Primož said. Destruction of democracy pays off. Destruction of media pays off. That is what we saw happening. That was what we have been naive about. I'm also shadow rapporteur on the next rule of law report. And I am really thinking out loud now, today also, about the need to address the safeguards in our society against populist parties that mainly became a business model. They are not political parties anymore. They started as political party, came to power, and then wanted to stay in power. So they became, well, everything from a business model to a criminal organization, if I may be so free to use that word. So that is the naivety we have to leave behind us. It's not going to be easy, but I also think the suggestion of creating some kind of emergency fast-track approach on this, but linking all these diverse instruments to each other, including the democratic education. Sorry for taking so long.
Okay, but you touched a little bit on the SAY and DMA, both of you mentioned it. But isn't there a danger, at least in its current design, which was recently confirmed at the Council of European Union, that these two acts will give even more power to digital platforms, since they are in a way formalizing them as the governors of online speech. They will be the one who are controlling the speech, because we, the governments and the regulatory authorities in nation states are not able to cope with the abundance of all traffic that is being distributed online. Isn't the current design giving them even more power and making us even more dependent on them? Who is going to answer?
We can complement, but for me, the real question, because in the US there is a question of dismantling the GAFA, and it should be the real question. They are too powerful. They are too powerful, and whatever we may say, they have a political vision of society. When you listen to the leader of this organization, there is a global political vision of society. And this is an issue, and they are a global power. And this debate about what they are not only systemic platform, what it is colonial companies. They behave exactly, we Europeans, Dutch, French, English, behave in the 60th and 70th century, with even little market share. They are destroying a lot of industries, and not only the media. And so they are weakening our society. So for me, the question is wider, and it's a major political issue that should be really raised at the right level. But the other thing is, when we see the children, they are becoming aware of the risk. So there is a question of how to speed up education and of the youngest. And there is a question also, as you said, on how to find business models which are economically sustainable. Democracy has a cost. Democracy has a cost. And media pluralism, which is a pillar of democracy, has a cost. This question should be discussed in this term in the public debate. And I think this is the responsibility of the FEPS to put this debate in this level. With the DMA, with the DSA, whatever we may say, we develop instruments which allow to control the GAFA. We are not able now to control the GAFA. We have no access to the data. This is an issue. But with the DSA, we try to develop the right of the citizen to develop awareness. And with both, we try to develop interoperability, which means you are in a situation to change from one operator to another one, which all that is good, I mean. But we need, in addition to that, a policy to sustain democracy. And it means we need financial resource.
Yes.
Financial resource, because that is
that traditionally has always been a difficult question. Should you publicly finance media? I think we have to open that debate, create the means to support these free media without, of course,
local media.
Yes,
public service media.
But I've been, for example, in local politics where there wasn't the debate. How can you secure that there will not be at least the idea that the reigning politicians, the politicians that are in the executive at that particular moment, have undue influence on the media? You have to be very strict on how to arrange that. But I think that if we want to beat this dragon, the dragon of the that is working together with the social media platforms, we need to do all these things jointly and interlinked with each other.
Okay. Yeah, as a matter of fact, the European Union already stepped in this area, and there are some funds being invested.
But can I give you an example of things we can do? In fact, if we look at at certain industries such as aeronautics, energy, finance, they need digital operating system, and they have the critical mass for the digital company develop system for them. The media has not the mass, so it's very expensive for them to operate digitally. So what we could push is, for example, cooperation for media, so that they can use digital platform at a minimum cost. There is we are entering the digital transformation period, and we need to think about public service, digital infrastructure, which could be put at the disposition of media, for example.
Let's give the floor to Primož. So
okay,
he can comment
three things. First, of course, I completely agree with both of you, which is probably boring now for the audience. They were expecting some conflict, maybe, I don't know, but okay. First thing, okay, there are some short-term solutions on improving media situation or journalist situation in Europe. For instance, regarding SLAPs, I'll only just give one example. There's a Swedish model, which in Sweden you cannot file a lawsuit for SLAP because the court can reject it on the ground that it's against public interest, that it's filed by a man who has already filed them before. You have like 5 or 6 reasons that can prevent media from getting slapped. Of course, the problem now for Swedish colleagues is that if they ran a story on some influential businessman there, this businessman can sue them, can file lawsuits in London or Monaco. So what we need is a European directive in this area. Basically, a coherent strategy on European level. The second thing, of course, we have to slay the dragon, the social media, because not only there's no model for survival of quality journalism, basically we now have on one side digitalized media landscape, on the other side feudalized media landscape. It's like in Middle Ages where pirates basically take all the goods. Facebook, Google, and other providers, they do not provide content. They only provide distribution. And so what new model needs to be based on producing content. And content is journalism, content are stories, content is local news, content is, which is, by the way, severely regulated. Even in countries like Slovenia, you have I mean, it's harder to buy a local newspaper in Slovenia regarding regulation than, for instance, I don't know, to spread some fake news through 20 countries. And that's absurd. And after Cambridge Analytica affair, the alarm bells should blink. And the third thing is education. We are a generation that were born in the 70s. We grew up with traditional media, and we fell into this social media abyss when we were 35, 40 years old. We knew nothing about it, and we gave them all. We gave all the data. We gave them pictures of our children. We gave them pictures of our holidays. We gave them data on themselves, the largest amount of data anyone ever has in history. So, okay, presumably we fell into this. Now we have to dig ourselves out there with awareness, but we have to work. What is more important is that we have to work with younger generations. So I think that school curriculums should introduce some sort of media education, or I don't know, in primary schools. Because this is now a generation that won't grow up with traditional media. This is a generation that will grow up with the social media. Social media are embedded in their identities. They will start with TikTok, continue with Instagram, and maybe end on, I don't know, Twitter or somewhere else, because they are too young for Facebook, they say. So basically, without it, there's no point. So awareness of people, how to check sources, how to trust sources, because as Mr. Thijs says that algorithms are stimulating spreading of fake news. We saw the testimony of a whistleblower of Facebook, which, sorry, I can't recall her name because my day was very long, but she said that they formed a profile with no friends and no connections, and in one week this profile was a Trump supporter. In 2 weeks it fell into the groups of Canon supporters. So I think that without changes in school system, it's an impossible task.
Indeed. Agnes, please, go ahead.
I just had something. I completely agree with you that education and digital awareness and so on, they are extremely important. But I think it is not enough anymore. So this kind of education solutions seem to be rather useful when we talked about fake news. But today we can say that the disinformation war is here. The situation is much more serious than a few years ago. And if we do not admit that the information war and disinformation war is here, we cannot protect ourselves. It is not enough to educate the future generations. I'm afraid that the democratic public sphere will be destroyed in the next years if we do not protect it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. I'm afraid we are running out of time, unfortunately. The debate is very heated, so we could stay here for 4 hours, but unfortunately, I think that's the right moment that we can ask for any comments from no comments. Any question from the audience on the spot? Online, they said that there's no comments. Okay, great. Then let's move this discussion towards the end of it. We can take a few more minutes because we started later. But let's start by wrapping up, and I will give you all an opportunity to take a minute or two to provide us with your key messages in terms of possible solutions, very focused, very brief, in terms of recommendations, both on what can be done on the national level and on the European one. What are the most pertinent areas to address?
Shall I start briefly? Yes, well, to name a few of the things that I will take back to Brussels, notwithstanding that my colleague Paul Tang is really going into these algorithms lately, also regarding the DMA and DSA. He's an expert on that. As I said, we have to do all these things interlinked, but I think we have to go on as a European Parliament on that path, elaborating, putting the finger also on the weak spots, also on the things where it might hurt, because it does hurt, that we need to see that we have been naive for too many years and now see our democracy being destroyed from within. But we need to address it. If not, we are, first of all, not living up to our own values, but secondly, we are losing credibility by the minute. Second point, on the SLAPs, I would like to support what Primož said also on, for example, one of the things that the European Parliament is advocating for is precisely that. It's precisely the point of, how do you say that, the early dismissal of a SLAP. And to embed that, and you call it the Swedish model, to embed that in all member states so that journalists can feel more secure, because what it's really doing, also in countries where there is not just such a severe situation as in Slovenia or in Hungary, it makes journalists afraid to publish. It makes journalists trying to self-censorship comes into play. So I really think we have to continue with that. And last point that I will also take back to Brussels is that idea of the express track, of the emergency track. We really, without being too alarming or creating some kind of sphere that is all going wrong, but we need to face the things that we have been naive on in the past years, and we need to create a sense of urgency. As I said in the beginning, in my first intervention, the rule of law and preserving the rule of law in our member states will probably be the single biggest challenge that we have to face in the next 5 years. We will be dealing with it for a few years, I'm afraid, but if we put our act together and interlink all the instruments we have at our disposal, I think we can do it, and I think we can make something better out of this and come stronger out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillaume.
Well, I fully agree with what Thijs said. I think there is one point which is also need to be explored, which is the situation of the economic situation of journalists and the fact that they get also the journalistic card, because in many countries, even in France, it's more and more difficult for journalists which are not belong. Yeah, but to get the card, to get the journalistic card, and this question, I think it would deserve to be a specific topic of the European Parliament, and maybe once or twice a year in the European Parliament there should be a kind of state of the European Union on democracy and media pluralism, facing the Commission of the President of the European Commission on this. We need to upgrade the political. It's not a technical debate, and my feeling it is dealt as a technical debate. And there are small issues which are major issues, such as getting the journalistic card, and it becomes more and more difficult for people. So there is one topic. The second topic is we need to speed up the cooperation of European media. Really, it means we should be able to develop transnational digital platform using automated translation to allow European citizens to have access of quality journalism in Europe with varied viewpoint wherever we are. And this is technically feasible. And in the European Parliament, you can push that. You can push that, and we may say there may be some competition issue. No, it's not a matter of competition issue, it's a matter of democratic survival. So there we can. And the EU also has to encourage and to go on encouraging transnational investigation. Because when national journalism are together, they are stronger. And it's good for everywhere in Europe, and it contributes also to increase trust in the profession of journalism, and we know how much this profession is perceived more and more as not doing its job. So that's several things we can do quickly and which are easy to implement.
Thank you. Primož, briefly.
Well, on domestic level, I have to emphasize that these are very, very difficult times for Slovenian journalism, for numerous number of my colleagues. And I hope that in domestic party and majority of domestic politics, these times will be recognized as an extraordinary. So that means that after the April election, there won't be any temptation from Slovenian politics to continue with some of the practices, because we know that every political party that is in power wants to have a say in media. And let's hope that, we all hope that media challenges that are ahead in Slovenia will be addressed through a new media law, because the current one is out of date. It's older than Facebook, so we know that we need a new media law, and I hope that we as a I now speak in the name of Journalistic Association of Slovenia, will be allowed to sit behind this table and will be listened to. And on a European level, as I said before, I hope that some kind of permanent body, whether through European Commission, whether through European Parliament, will be introduced to protect the pillar that must not fall.
Thank you. Ágnes?
My first suggestion is the knowledge sharing. So the model of the illiberal states are spreading. It is also very important to discuss together and to find it out together how it is possible to fight against these illiberal states. The other issue is that use the tools that we have. I already mentioned the competition law. It is a very strong tool for the European Commission. The rule of law procedure is absolutely important in this sense, and yes, the European Parliament is absolutely proactive in this policy making and law making. So I think it will be the same in the future. And the third one is that Europe has to invest into the media markets. It seems to be a rather small issue, but I think the journalism funds are absolutely important. I think it was also originated in the European Parliament. It was just announced that a kind of European news agency will be created. I think it is an absolutely good idea. And it is time to think it over, if it is possible to create or to build European digital platforms. I think it is a future. It is incredibly difficult, but I think it's time to think about this kind of European future.
Thank you very much for ending in such a constructive way with lots of tangible proposals, I would say. And despite all that was said in the last hour, also in a way optimistic, because I think we need to preserve optimism and motivation to continue with the necessary reform. The range of challenges, as we've seen, is very broad. We didn't even touch on all of them. Very broad and varied, and so the responses should be comprehensive and varied. And regardless the differences in the immediate contexts, we've seen that there is a lot that is being shared among us, and these issues cannot be just addressed on the national scale. And that's why the discussions, such as the discussion today, are important. So big thanks to all of you. Thanks to the organizers, thanks to the audience for your patience, and thanks to the interpreters for allowing the participants to listen to this discussion in Slovenian language. And I wish you all a nice continuation of this event. And we jump straight to the next panel, which will be chaired by Laszlo Andor.